Red Bull is on the verge of facing the most colossal challenge of its Formula One trajectory, and the events that will unfold in 2026 could define whether Max Verstappen continues with the team or seeks other opportunities. Christian Horner has just made declarations that caused a genuine uproar in the paddock, and his words about Mercedes could generate devastating consequences for the entire grid. Let's start with the fundamentals. From 2026 onwards, Formula One will implement new propulsion regulations, and this transformation is so drastic that it could completely revolutionize the championship. While Mercedes, Ferrari, and Honda maintain their conventional engines, Red Bull chose to concentrate all its bets on something totally innovative, creating its own engine through Red Bull powertrains, establishing a partnership with Ford. However, here arises the question that everyone avoids addressing directly. Has Red Bull perhaps assumed a commitment beyond its capabilities? Because one situation is dominating the category using Renault and subsequently Honda engines, another completely different is developing an engine from scratch and competing with giants who have been doing this for decades. Christian Horner himself acknowledged that the pressure is colossal. And when the Red Bull leader acknowledges pressure, you understand that the situation is critical. But it was his words about Mercedes that truly caught attention and may have established an even more intense rivalry between the two teams. Horner was categorical. It would be embarrassing for Mercedes if Red Bull, a newcomer in engine development, arrived ahead of them in 2026. This declaration doesn't constitute merely a provocation. It's a declaration of war camouflaged as modesty. Consider this. Mercedes possesses decades of experience in Formula One engine development. They completely dominated the hybrid era from 2014 to 2020, conquering 8 consecutive constructors' titles. They possess one of the most experienced and well-financed development teams globally. And now, Horner is stating that it would be embarrassing for them to lose to a team that is literally starting from zero. But why would Horner make such an audacious declaration? The answer lies in psychological strategy and what is truly at stake here. Red Bull isn't just developing an engine, they're betting the future of the team and principally Max Verstappen's permanence. And speaking of Max Verstappen, here's the elephant in the room that everyone pretends to ignore. The 4-time world champion has a contract with Red Bull until 2028, but this means nothing if the team cannot provide him with a competitive car. The rumors about conversations between Verstappen's camp and Mercedes aren't just press speculation, they're reality. The situation becomes even more delicate because Verstappen will be in a unique position in 2026. He will be able to observe which engine manufacturer comes out ahead with the new regulations before making any decision about his future from 2027 onwards. It's a perfect strategic position for a driver, but a nightmare for any team principal. Imagine the following situation. It's March 2026, first Grand Prix of the season, and the Red Bull powertrain's engine is clearly behind Mercedes, Ferrari, or other manufacturers. Verstappen, who is accustomed to fighting for victories and titles, suddenly finds himself battling for points in the middle of the pack. How long do you think he would endure this situation? Horner understands this better than anyone. Therefore, his declaration about Mercedes isn't just bravado, it's an attempt to create controlled expectations. By stating that it would be embarrassing for Mercedes to lose to them, he is simultaneously reducing expectations for Red Bull and increasing pressure on their rivals. Red Bull is developing their engine under completely new regulations, which means all teams are, to some extent, starting from zero. However, established manufacturers like Mercedes, Ferrari, and Honda have enormous advantages in terms of experience, resources, and accumulated knowledge. Red Bull invested hundreds of millions of dollars in Red Bull powertrains, hired dozens of specialist engineers, many of them coming from other engine manufacturers, and created a completely new infrastructure. But investment doesn't guarantee success, especially in something as complex as a Formula One engine. Here's where Horner's strategy becomes even more evident. He mentioned that having chassis and engine under the same roof will be an enormous advantage. Chassis engineers talking directly with engine engineers, packaging optimization, instantaneous communication between departments. This isn't just theory, it's exactly how Mercedes dominated the beginning of the hybrid era, but Horner was also realistic about timelines. He admitted that perhaps 2026 won't be the year when Red Bull will be ahead, but that 2027, 2028, and following years will be when the investment truly pays dividends. And here's the problem. Will Max Verstappen wait that long? Current Formula One is relentless. Drivers at the peak of their careers don't have time for long-term projects if this means years without fighting for titles. Verstappen is 27 years old, at the absolute peak of his career, and every season that passes without a competitive car is a lost opportunity. Therefore, conversations between Verstappen's camp and Mercedes make so much sense. Mercedes has its own engine, proven experience, and will be desperate to return to the top after difficult years. Lewis Hamilton is leaving, they need a new leader, and Verstappen would be the obvious choice. But Red Bull also has important trump cards. They showed in recent seasons that they know how to create winning cars. They have an exceptional team culture, a working environment that Verstappen clearly appreciates, and Adrian Newey, who even leaving the team left a solid foundation of aerodynamic knowledge. What makes this situation even more fascinating is that Formula One is establishing compensation mechanisms for manufacturers who fall behind. More dyno testing time, extra development budgets, rules that try to balance the battlefield. This could help Red Bull if they really start behind in 2026. But here's the fundamental question. Will these mechanisms be sufficient? And will Verstappen have patience to wait for them to work? Formula One. History is full of examples of teams that made large investments in long-term projects that never worked out. Remember Honda in the 2000s, when they returned as engine suppliers, or Toyota, who spent billions and never managed to win a race. Even Mercedes took years to perfect their hybrid engine, and they had decades of previous experience. Horner's declaration about it being embarrassing for Mercedes also reveals something about Red Bull's mentality. They're not just entering this project expecting to be competitive, they're entering expecting to win. And this mentality can be both an advantage and a disadvantage. The timing of all this is also crucial. The new regulations of 2026 aren't just about engines. They're about the entire concept of the cars. Aerodynamics, sustainable fuels, electrical components, everything will be changing simultaneously. This means that even established manufacturers will face enormous challenges. But Red Bull will be facing these challenges while also trying to master a completely new area for them. It's like trying to learn to drive while also building the car. Possible, but extremely risky. Verstappen is observing all this closely. He knows that his decision about where to race from 2027 onwards could define the rest of his career. Stay at Red Bull and bet on the long-term project, or go to a team with an established engine and more immediate chances of success? The answer may depend not only on Red Bull powertrain's engine performance, but also on how other manufacturers adapt to the new regulations. If Mercedes stumbles in the transition, suddenly Red Bull won't need to be perfect, just better than the competition. In the end, Horner's declaration about it being embarrassing for Mercedes reveals much about Red Bull's confidence, but also about the enormity of the challenge they face. They're not just building an engine, they're betting the team's future and trying to keep the world's best driver. Will they succeed? Will Mercedes really be embarrassed if Red Bull comes out ahead? And more importantly, will Max Verstappen stay to see how this story ends? One thing is certain. 2026 will be one of the most decisive years in Formula One's recent history. What do you think? Is Red Bull being courageous or reckless by betting everything on their own engine?